On the planet Zarathus, far from Earth, humans had started a small colony. The colony was full of scientists, engineers, and explorers, all excited to study new life forms. One of the most unusual discoveries was a clutch of albino hatchlings, dragon-like creatures with pale white scales that shimmered under the strange sunlight. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their sharp little claws clicked when they moved. They were rare and beautiful, but there was something about them that made most people uncomfortable. From the moment they hatched, the hatchlings were cranky and difficult. They hissed at anyone who came close, snapping with tiny teeth and swiping with their claws. Even the colony's experienced caretakers struggled to feed them. When a hatchling wanted food, it screeched loudly and lunged at the nearest hand, leaving small scratches. When it wanted to play, it would bite or push others away. The more people tried to handle them, the more defensive and angry they became. Colonists whispered among themselves. "These hatchlings are impossible," one engineer muttered. "They'll never learn to work with humans." Another caretaker shook his head. "I don't know why we even bother. Look at them, they're just trouble." Over time, the hatchlings were ignored more and more, kept in a separate part of the lab, behind glass walls and metal gates. The hatchlings hated being alone but hated people even more. They paced in their small enclosure, curling their tails around each other for warmth and comfort. Sometimes they would fight with one another, snapping and hissing, because their frustration had nowhere else to go. The pale scales of the albino hatchlings glimmered in the artificial lights, and their glowing eyes often gave an impression of anger, which only made the colonists more cautious. One day, a group of scientists decided the hatchlings were a lost cause. "We should move them to the wastelands," one suggested, "where they won't bother anyone." The others nodded reluctantly. The idea was simple. If no one could handle them, maybe they would survive on their own, far from the colony. The hatchlings would be left to fend for themselves, just another strange species in an alien desert. The hatchlings didn't understand what was happening. They hissed and tried to escape, climbing the walls of their enclosure with all their might. Their voices were loud and desperate, echoing through the empty corridors of the lab. Even the youngest hatchlings, barely a few weeks old, made noises that sounded like warnings. They weren't just angry, they were afraid and alone, and for the first time they could feel that no one wanted them. One little hatchling, smaller than the rest, with scales almost pure white and eyes like tiny crystals, curled up in a corner. It watched the humans with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The others were too angry to notice, but this small one seemed different. Even though it hissed occasionally, it was quieter, watching the doors and listening to the footsteps in the hall. It didn't understand why no one wanted them, but it could feel the tension and fear from the humans. The colony continued its work, paying little attention to the hatchlings' cries. Engineers focused on their machines, and scientists wrote reports about other discoveries. The hatchlings became background noise, a problem no one wanted to solve. But the hatchlings were smarter than anyone realized. They watched carefully. They learned how humans moved, how they spoke, and how they reacted to different behaviors. Even in their anger, they were curious about these strange, two-legged creatures who could reach them through the glass. Despite the neglect, the hatchlings survived. They found comfort in one another, huddling together for warmth and safety. They played in small bursts, chasing shadows or tapping at the metal walls. They hissed at anyone who came near, but in the quiet moments, there were signs of intelligence and emotion. The smallest hatchling, especially, seemed to be watching and thinking, as if it understood more than the others. And so life went on. The humans ignored them, the hatchlings grew crankier and more distant, and the colony prepared to abandon them in the wastelands. The little albino dragons did not know that soon, everything would change. For now they were shunned, alone, and labeled as trouble. Yet even in their small enclosure, there was a spark of life that no one could take away, a spark that waited for someone who would see them differently. The hatchlings hissed as the lights dimmed, curling together for the night. No one came to comfort them. No one asked their names or cared about their fears. They were just the cranky albino hatchlings, forgotten by everyone except each other. But deep down, even in their crankiness, there was a tiny hope, a hope that one day someone might come who would not see their anger or their strange appearance, but only the creatures they could be. Lena arrived at the colony early in the morning, her boots crunching softly on the silver sand outside the lab. She was small for her age, with curious green eyes that seemed to notice everything. While most of the colonists hurried to their work, she wandered slowly, looking at plants, machines, and especially at the lab where the albino hatchlings were kept. She had heard the whispers about them, how cranky and dangerous they were, how no one wanted to care for them, but that didn't scare her. In fact, it made her even more curious. She stood in front of the enclosure watching the hatchlings. They hissed and bared their teeth, their glowing eyes following her every move. A tiny one leapt toward the glass, claws scratching, but Lena only smiled softly. She didn't shout or try to push them away. Instead, she sat down on the cold floor a little distance from the glass and waited. The hatchlings paused. They had seen humans before, of course, but no one had ever waited for them like this. Most humans tried to feed them quickly or left them alone entirely. Lena, however, seemed different. She didn't reach for them. She didn't make sudden movements. She simply looked at them with calm, open eyes as if trying to understand what they felt. At first, nothing happened. The hatchlings hissed, spat tiny sparks of light from their mouths, and retreated to their corners. Lena stayed where she was, her voice soft and steady as she began to speak. "It's okay," she said. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to be your friend." Her words carried a strange weight. They weren't commands, threats, or demands. They were gentle, almost musical in the quiet lab. The smallest hatchling, the one with scales like pale snow and eyes like crystals, tilted its head. It hissed softly, not in anger but in confusion. No human had ever spoken like this to it. Days passed and Lena returned each morning. She brought small pieces of food the hatchlings liked, soft fruits and nutrient gels, leaving them near the walls instead of forcing them into her hands. She observed how they moved, which ones were shy, which ones were bold, and which ones simply wanted to be left alone. Slowly, the smallest hatchling began to creep closer when she sat down. Its tiny claws tapped the floor nervously, but it didn't run away. The other hatchlings noticed. They hissed at each other, unsure what to make of this human girl who did not fear them. They watched as the smallest hatchling approached Lena's hand, sniffing and circling, testing if it was safe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it nuzzled her palm. Lena froze, not moving, letting the hatchling decide its own pace. She whispered, "See? I'm not going to hurt you." It was a small victory but an important one. The tiny albino hatchling began to trust her, and with it, a spark of hope lit inside the group. Lena noticed subtle changes too. The hatchlings seemed calmer, more curious, less frantic. Their hisses were shorter, their eyes less fiery. She smiled softly to herself, realizing that patience could reach even the crankiest of hearts. One afternoon, a group of colonists walked past. They stopped when they saw Lena sitting near the enclosure, the smallest hatchling brushing against her fingers. "She's wasting her time," one scientist said. "Those creatures are impossible. You can't train them or befriend them." Lena looked up but didn't argue. She only whispered to the hatchling, "They don't understand. But we do, don't we?" The hatchling hissed softly, almost in agreement, and moved a little closer to her hand. As weeks passed, Lena became a constant presence in the lab. She learned the hatchlings' moods, which ones liked warmth, which ones liked to hide, and which ones were always on edge. The small albino hatchling became braver each day, exploring her clothing, sniffing her boots, and even nuzzling her shoulder once. Lena laughed quietly, feeling a deep connection she had never felt before. The other hatchlings slowly followed. They didn't all trust her at once, but they watched and learned from the smallest one. Lena never forced them. She let them take their time. And the colony began to notice. Some scientists stopped whispering, instead watching with curiosity. "Maybe she's doing something right," one murmured. But not everyone approved. Some leaders still whispered about moving the hatchlings to the wastelands. They didn't see the bond forming. They didn't see the hatchling's spark of intelligence and emotion. All they saw was a human girl spending time with cranky, dangerous creatures. Lena ignored their doubts. She had learned something important. Friendship and patience could break through fear and anger. She didn't need approval. She only needed to reach the hatchlings one by one, until they realized that not all humans were threats. One evening, as the sun of Zarathus set in streaks of pink and purple, the smallest hatchling curled up near her boots, its tiny body trembling with exhaustion. Lena reached down slowly and stroked its smooth, pale scales. "You're safe," she whispered. "I promise you're safe now." For the first time the hatchlings felt it, someone truly cared. Someone who would not reject them, scold them, or abandon them. And for Lena, that tiny gesture of trust was enough to know that she had made the first real connection with a creature no one else believed in. The colony might still see them as cranky, unwanted, and strange. But Lena didn't. To her, they were alive, thinking, feeling, and waiting for someone to understand them. And she was ready to be that someone no matter how long it took. Lena returned to the lab every morning as she had done for weeks. The hatchlings were no longer as cranky as they had been at first, but most still hissed when she approached. Only the smallest albino hatchling, the one with crystal-like eyes, greeted her with curiosity instead of fear. Lena had named it Frost because of the pale shimmer of its scales. Frost had become her little companion, often crawling onto her lap or nuzzling her hand when she spoke softly. The other hatchlings watched silently. They were still wary of humans, but Frost's growing trust had begun to stir something in them. They had seen how Lena moved calmly, how she never forced interaction, and how she never raised her voice. Slowly they began to observe her without hostility, studying her every gesture. One day a loud crash echoed through the lab. A stack of containers had fallen, spilling tools and supplies onto the floor. The other humans scattered, afraid of what the hatchlings might do in the sudden chaos. But Lena stayed calm. She knelt down and called softly, "It's okay. It's okay, everyone. Stay with me." Frost darted toward her, curling around her legs as if for protection. Lena extended her hand to the nearest hatchling, whispering, "You can trust me." The hatchling froze for a moment, its tail flicking nervously. Then, with a cautious step, it touched her hand with its nose. Lena smiled, keeping her voice gentle. "Good. That's it." The other hatchlings began to watch more closely. The next day, one of the larger hatchlings crept closer to Lena, its movements hesitant but deliberate. It sniffed the air around her and then backed away quickly, unsure. Lena didn't move suddenly. She simply stayed still, letting the hatchling decide what to do. After a few minutes, it inched forward again, brushing lightly against Frost, who had stayed near Lena. Lena whispered softly, "You see? You're safe here." For the first time, Lena realized something important. The hatchlings weren't just cranky, they were scared and unsure. They had been rejected by the colony, ignored by caretakers, and left to fend for themselves. Their anger and hisses were not cruelty, but a defense mechanism. And now, with patience and understanding, they were slowly learning that humans could be safe and kind. Weeks turned into a month. Every day, Lena spent hours with the hatchlings. She brought small treats and toys that encouraged them to explore and play. Sometimes she would lie on the floor, letting them crawl over her. Frost led the way and the other hatchlings followed cautiously. They began to mirror Frost's behavior, slowly learning that Lena was not a threat. One afternoon, a serious breakthrough happened. A larger albino hatchling, previously the crankiest and most aggressive, crept close to Lena. It sniffed the air nervously and then touched her hand with its claw very gently. Lena froze, careful not to move too quickly. She whispered, "Yes, that's it. You're safe." The other hatchlings watched, their eyes wide. It was the first time any of them had voluntarily approached her. One by one they inched closer until all of them were circling around Lena. They hissed occasionally, not in anger but in excitement and curiosity. Lena laughed softly, delighted at the progress. "Look at you all," she said. "You're amazing." Even the colony staff began to notice the change. Scientists whispered to each other in amazement. "I think she's actually bonding with them," one said. "I've never seen anything like this." Engineers peeked through the glass, astonished at how calm the hatchlings were, how they responded to a human's gentle voice. Some started to consider Lena's methods, realizing that perhaps patience and care could work where force and neglect had failed. One evening, Lena sat on the floor, Frost curled in her lap, and the other hatchlings gathered around. The soft light of Zaratha's setting sun streamed through the lab windows, casting a pale glow on their scales. For the first time, the hatchlings didn't hiss at the humans nearby. They didn't retreat. They chose to be near Lena, trusting her completely. Lena smiled as she stroked Frost's tiny head. "You've done it," she whispered. "You've all learned to trust me." She looked around at the other hatchlings, their glowing eyes reflecting her own excitement. "And now, maybe we can teach everyone else how amazing you all are." That night, as the hatchlings slept curled up together, Lena felt a deep sense of hope. She had broken through their fear and anger, and in doing so, had proven that even the crankiest, most rejected creatures could learn to trust. The spark of friendship had begun, and it was stronger than she had ever imagined. Little did Lena know this bond was only the beginning. The hatchlings were clever, quick to learn, and surprisingly strong. They had already begun to observe her behavior, remember it, and respond to it. And when the right moment came, they would prove that even the most overlooked and rejected beings could change the world. For now, though, they were just beginning to understand friendship, and Lena was the first to show them what it could feel like. It was a small victory but an important one. A victory that would grow into something far greater than anyone on Zarathus could yet imagine. The next morning the colony woke to a loud alarm. Red lights flashed across the corridors and a storm was raging outside. The winds on Zarathus were harsh, stronger than anything the colonists had expected. Rain lashed against the glass walls, and small debris flew across the open courtyards. The hatchlings, already uneasy, were panicked by the noise and movement. In their enclosure, the albino hatchlings hissed and banged against the walls, their claws scraping metal. Frost shrieked, running in circles, while the larger hatchlings flared their wings and snapped at one another in fear. The storm had triggered their instincts and now they were terrified. No human presence had calmed them, they needed someone who understood their fear. Lena heard the alarms and ran toward the lab. She didn't stop to grab gear or check the readings. All that mattered was the hatchlings. When she arrived, the hatchlings were frantic. One by one they crashed into the walls, screeching and knocking over feeding trays. Lena dropped to her knees near the entrance and called softly, "It's okay. Calm down. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." Frost was the first to respond. The small hatchling ran to her, pressing its pale, shimmering body against her legs. Lena stroked its scales gently, whispering, "You're safe. I promise." The other hatchlings hesitated, watching Frost's trust. Lena extended her hands slowly, showing she meant no harm. The hatchlings saw the calm in her eyes, the patience in her movements, and one by one, they began to approach cautiously. It wasn't easy. The storm outside shook the building, rattling the enclosure. Rainwater seeped in through cracks and some of the larger hatchlings panicked, thrashing against the walls. Lena stayed calm, moving slowly among them, her voice soft and steady. She guided them gently toward the center of the enclosure, her hands outstretched but not threatening. "It's okay, come here," she whispered. "I'll keep you safe." The hatchlings responded in small ways at first. A claw tapped her arm. A tail brushed her shoulder. Then Frost led the others, and the hatchlings began to trust her presence instead of fearing it. Lena realized that her patience had built something stronger than she had imagined. They weren't just trusting her, they were relying on her in their moment of fear. A loud crash made the largest hatchling scream. A support beam from a nearby corner had snapped in the storm, falling with a thunderous roar. The hatchling froze, eyes wide, tail thrashing. Lena moved carefully, staying low to appear non-threatening, and whispered, "It's okay, it's okay. I'm right here." She slowly guided it toward her, letting the hatchling feel her calm. Its claws touched her hands lightly, and it leaned against her for the first time, allowing itself to be soothed. The other hatchlings watching this followed suit. One by one they pressed close to Lena, seeking her guidance. The storm raged on, but inside the enclosure, there was a bubble of calm. Lena had become the anchor that held them steady. Her presence was enough to turn panic into safety. The colonists outside watched in awe through the glass. Some had come to see the hatchlings in chaos, expecting to find destruction, but instead they saw Lena surrounded by albino hatchlings, her hands resting gently on their scales. The hatchlings were still pale and glowing, but they were quiet, leaning into her touch, trusting her completely. When the storm finally began to fade, the damage inside the lab became clear. Some feeding trays had been knocked over and water had pooled near the walls. But none of the hatchlings were injured and none of the humans were hurt either. Lena had led them through the chaos with nothing but her patience and presence. Frost sat on her shoulder, wings slightly trembling, and Lena whispered, "We made it. You're safe now." The larger hatchlings curled around her, pressing close. For the first time, Lena realized how strong their bond had become. It wasn't just trust, they had come to rely on her, and she had proven herself worthy of that trust. The colonists slowly entered the lab, still staring in amazement. "I've never seen anything like this," one muttered. "Those hatchlings, they listened to her. They obeyed her." Another nodded, whispering, "She didn't force them. She didn't threaten them. And yet, she controlled the panic." Lena looked around at the colony, then down at the hatchlings. "It's not control," she said softly. "It's trust. They're not dangerous. They're just scared. They just needed someone to show them safety." That night, after the storm passed, the hatchlings curled together in their enclosure, resting but still alert. Lena stayed nearby, watching over them as they slept. Frost nestled against her chest, and the other hatchlings settled around her in a loose circle. They were calm now, no longer hissing or thrashing, because they had learned that someone cared for them no matter what. The storm had tested their fear, and Lena had passed that test with them. She had proven that patience, understanding, and bravery could turn even the crankiest, most frightened hatchlings into creatures capable of trust and connection. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The colony had seen what she had accomplished, and some were beginning to change their minds. If one human girl could reach the hatchlings when everyone else failed, maybe there was hope that the rest of the colony could learn to see them differently too. But for now, Lena focused on the hatchlings, watching them breathe softly in the dim light. They were hers to protect, and she would not let anything harm them again. The storm had passed, but the bond she had built would last far longer, stronger than anything on Zarathus. The storm had passed, leaving Zarathus quiet and still. Outside the lab, the colony was busy repairing broken equipment and checking damaged structures. But inside, Lena sat on the floor with the albino hatchlings gathered around her. Frost, the smallest one, rested on her shoulder, wings folded, eyes half closed in trust. The other hatchlings curled near her legs, their tails entwined, their claws tapping gently as if to reassure each other. For the first time they were calm, no longer the cranky, rejected creatures everyone had feared. The colony began to notice. Scientists and engineers peeked through the glass walls, whispering in awe. "They're different," one said. "They're not attacking her. They're listening." Another nodded, eyes wide. "It's amazing. She's actually bonded with them." Some of the senior leaders who had planned to send the hatchlings to the wastelands shook their heads in disbelief. They had expected chaos, not trust. Lena looked around at the hatchlings, her hand gently stroking Frost's scales. "See," she whispered softly. "You're not just safe. You're special. You can do amazing things if you trust me." She didn't know exactly what the hatchlings could do, but she had a feeling that they were smarter and stronger than anyone imagined. They had survived when others gave up, and now they were ready to show what they were capable of. It didn't take long. The hatchlings began to explore the lab, moving with curiosity rather than fear. They nudged tools, tapped at glowing panels, and even solved small puzzles Lena had set up to keep them entertained. Frost led the way, showing the others it was safe to investigate. Lena laughed softly, amazed. The albino hatchlings weren't just surviving, they were thriving. One day, a colony engineer accidentally triggered a small alarm while testing a new machine. Normally the hatchlings would have panicked, hissing and thrashing. But this time they reacted differently. They didn't flee or attack. Instead, they moved calmly toward Lena, forming a protective circle around her. Their eyes glowed softly, not with anger, but with focus. Lena realized that they were paying attention to her guidance, ready to act if danger came. Word spread quickly through the colony. "They're listening to her," people whispered. "They understand her." The leaders could no longer deny it. The hatchlings were intelligent, perceptive, and capable of forming deep bonds. And it had all happened because Lena had seen them as friends, not as problems. The albino hatchlings continued to grow, their scales shimmering brighter under Zarathus' sun. They became playful, exploring corners of the lab and interacting with each other in ways that showed their personalities. Some were curious and bold, some shy and cautious, but all were unique and remarkable. The colony began to treat them differently, offering more care and attention, learning from Lena's example. Then one day the hatchlings showed something truly extraordinary. A sudden fire broke out near the storage area. The humans panicked, unsure how to handle it. But the albino hatchlings reacted instantly. Frost and the others used their psychic abilities, a subtle, glowing energy that could push objects or create small barriers. They guided falling tools away from humans and helped contain the fire long enough for the colonists to put it out. The colony watched in shock. The once cranky, rejected hatchlings had become heroes, saving lives through intelligence, teamwork, and trust. Lena stood among them, proud and amazed. "You see," she said softly as Frost nuzzled her cheek, "you were never just cranky or dangerous. You were just waiting for someone to believe in you." From that day on, the albino hatchlings were no longer shunned. They were embraced, celebrated, and respected. The colony learned a valuable lesson, that patience, kindness, and understanding could reveal the potential in even the most rejected beings. The hatchlings thrived, forming bonds not only with Lena but with others in the colony, showing intelligence, empathy, and courage. Lena continued to care for them, teaching them to explore, play, and interact with humans. The hatchlings became companions, helpers, and even protectors of the colony. They were no longer alone or angry. They had found friendship, purpose, and trust. As the sun set over Zarathus, casting pink and gold light across the lab, Lena sat with Frost on her shoulder and the others curled around her. She looked at them and whispered, "We did it. You're safe. You're loved. And the world will never forget you." The hatchlings stirred slightly, leaning closer to her, glowing softly in the fading light. The colony had changed too. People had learned to look beyond fear, beyond appearances, and see the value of empathy and patience. One human girl's courage had transformed the lives of an entire species. The albino hatchlings were no longer rejected. They were heroes, friends, and proof that understanding could change everything. Lena smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart she had never known before. The hatchlings had given her as much as she had given them: trust, companionship, and the knowledge that even the smallest act of kindness could change the course of many lives. And in that quiet, golden light, Lena and the albino hatchlings sat together, a human and creatures once feared, now united by friendship, trust, and the promise of a bright future.